The fluorescent light above the registrar's desk buzzed faintly, like something dying. The room smelled of old paper and quiet judgment. Stifled laughter drifted from the bench behind her. "Are you sure?" the registrar asked one last time. Emma Whitfield gripped the pen until her knuckles went white. Then she signed. The man beside her worn boots, oil-stained jacket reached for the pen. At that exact moment, every phone in the room began to vibrate at once. Faces changed. A name buried beneath shell companies and erased headlines had resurfaced on the markets. Emma didn't look at her phone. She looked at him. 6 weeks earlier, the Whitfield library smelled of leather and lemon polish, the way it had smelled since Emma was a child. The afternoon light came in slantwise across the long Persian rug, catching the dust her stepmother's housekeeper never quite managed to get out of the air. Gerald Whitfield sat behind the mahogany desk. Patricia stood at the tall window with her arms folded, looking out at the garden as though none of this required her direct attention. Clifford, her father's younger brother, sat in the armchair in the corner, slowly turning a tumbler of amber liquid in his hand. "Sit down, Emma," her father said. She sat, he told her without preamble, which was his particular form of mercy. The Whitfield group was not struggling. It was collapsing. 3 consecutive failed investments. A leveraged acquisition gone badly wrong. The quiet, devastating withdrawal of a major institutional partner 3 months ago that no one had been able to replace. In 6 weeks, unless something changed, the company would be forced into a structured bankruptcy. Emma listened. She felt the floor shift slightly beneath her feet. "There is one solution," her father said. She did not expect what came next. "There was a creditor," he said, "reached indirectly through a chain of holding companies, a man who had agreed to extend a critical operational lifeline, not in exchange for equity, not in exchange for repayment terms, in exchange for a marriage. His name is Daniel Hayes," Gerald said. "I know what a transactional marriage is," Emma said, her voice flat. "I'm asking why you think I would agree to one." "Because the alternative," Clifford said from the armchair, not looking up from his glass, "is that all of this goes away. The company, the apartment, the foundation, the staff, all of it." Patricia turned from the window. "We're not asking you to love him, Emma. We're asking you to be practical." "Who is he?" Her father's pause was almost imperceptible. "A single father. A local man. He has a daughter. He lives simply." "He's poor," Emma said. "He's modest. He's poor. That's what you're telling me. You want me to marry a man with no money, to save a company that has no money." "The arrangement has been made," her father said. "The paperwork is prepared." She looked at the 3 of them. At her father's studied composure, at Patricia's careful blankness, at the glass in Clifford's hand. "The price to keep all of this," she said slowly, "is me." No one corrected her. They left her there. The door closed. She heard their footsteps move down the hall and into the parlor. She did not move. She looked at the black and white photograph of her grandfather above the desk. He was standing in front of the first Whitfield building, hat in hand, looking at the camera with the unguarded confidence of a man who believed he was building something for someone he loved. For the first time since she had come home from London, Emma felt very clearly that the structure beneath her feet was not her. It was something she had been standing on. There was a difference. She did not cry. She turned out the desk lamp and walked upstairs and packed a single rolling suitcase. She packed it as though for 2 weeks. She did not yet allow herself to think any further than that. Dorchester sat at the city's southern edge, a neighborhood that had once been working class and was now in the ambiguous middle stage of someone else's gentrification. The houses were small. The trees were old. The street was quiet in the particular way of places where people actually lived their lives, rather than performed them. Daniel Hayes's house was a 1940s craftsman bungalow with a green front door and a porch that sagged slightly on the left. A bicycle leaned against the side fence. Wind chimes made of driftwood and sea glass hung from the eaves and turned in the spring air. Emma stood at the front gate with her rolling suitcase and looked at the house for a long moment. Daniel unlocked the door and held it open. She walked in. The ceilings were low. The floors were original hardwood worn to a warm honey color. A kitchen opened off the front room, painted a soft yellow, with copper pots hanging from a rack and a bowl of clementines on the counter. It was clean. That was the first thing she noticed, and she hated that it surprised her. Then she saw the girl, 8 years old, small for her age, dark hair, an expression of absolutely unguarded curiosity. She wore a t-shirt with a diagram of the solar system on it and held a book about deep-sea creatures pressed against her chest. "Hi," the girl said. "Are you going to live here now, Lily?" Daniel said, quiet but not sharp. "Yes," Emma said. For now, Lily considered this with focused seriousness, the way someone files information they expect to need later. Then she looked at her father. "Dad, she's pretty." "I know," Daniel said. Emma looked away. In the days that followed, she mapped the rhythms of the house like a spy cataloging foreign territory. Daniel rose at 5:30. By the time she came out of her room at 7, coffee was made and there was food on the table. Eggs, toast, fruit, whatever the house had. He never announced it. He just left it there. He worked at an independent garage 3 blocks away. He left every morning at 7:15 and returned at 6. On Tuesdays, he picked Lily up early for her swimming lesson. On Thursdays, he stayed at the school for what Emma gathered was a science club. He did not impose his schedule on hers. He did not ask her for anything. She found this, in its own way, more unsettling than hostility would have been. It was a Wednesday morning when the small thing happened. She had just ended a video call with a former colleague about a real estate investment trust that was being restructured. She had been going back and forth on the merits of a particular debt equity position. She walked into the kitchen to refill her coffee and found Daniel at the sink, washing dishes. "Sorry," she said. "Was I loud?" "No." He did not turn around. He rinsed a glass. "The swap structure they're proposing," he said, "only works if the underlying yield assumptions hold. If their cap rate projections are off by more than 40 basis points, the whole thing reverses." Emma stopped pouring her coffee. She turned to look at him. He was rinsing another glass. He did not look up. That's a very specific observation." "You were talking loud enough," he said. "Where did you learn about cap rates?" He set the glass on the drying rack. "Read it somewhere." He dried his hands on a dish towel and left the kitchen. She stood there with her coffee going cold and watched the empty doorway where he had been. That evening at dinner, Lily talked about a documentary she had seen at school about hydrothermal vents at the bottom of the ocean. There were creatures down there, she said, that did not need sunlight at all. They lived on chemicals from the rocks. They had been living down there, maybe, for 1 billion years. She turned to Emma with her direct, careful eyes. "We could go sometime. Dad takes me to the coast. There's a tide pool place." Emma looked at her plate. She felt Daniel watching her, not directly. "Maybe," she said. It was the first time, in any conversation in that house, she had not said no. 2 mornings later, Emma was coming in from the garden, where she had taken to making her morning calls because the light was better there. She came through the side door and stopped in the hallway. Daniel was on the phone. His voice was low, unhurried. She caught fragments. "Hold the Singapore position." I said, "Hold it. Don't touch it until I tell you." A pause. "The Harris acquisition, no. Walk away. The liabilities aren't priced in. Tell them I'm not available. I won't be available. They know why." He hung up as she came around the corner. He looked at her with no expression at all. "Work?" she asked. "Yeah." He put on his coveralls and drove to the garage. That afternoon she opened the financial news on her laptop. The Harris acquisition was a mid-sized logistics company that had been the subject of a quiet bidding war for the past month. By 6 o'clock that evening, the front-running bidder had withdrawn from the deal. By morning, the deal was dead. She sat at her desk and thought about a man in coveralls in a hallway in Dorchester telling someone, on a phone, to walk away from an acquisition that had subsequently collapsed. She thought about the cap rate remark. She thought about her Italian leather pumps. She had worn them to a meeting the week before, caught the heel on a curb, and set them by the front door, meaning to take them to be repaired. The next morning the scuff had been gone, the leather buffed. She had said nothing. He had said nothing. She had assumed she imagined it. She did not assume anymore. That afternoon she went to a Whitfield Group board meeting. Clifford was there, in his usual chair at her father's right hand, with the easy confidence of someone who had always known the room belonged to him. He took the meeting from her by the third item. He did it gently. He did it with the appearance of helpfulness. He asked twice with great care about her judgment after her recent personal circumstances. She drove home with her hands locked on the wheel. In the front hall of the bungalow she snapped at Daniel about something small, the way the mail had been stacked, the fact that the porch light had been left on, things that did not matter, and that she knew did not matter. He listened. He did not answer. He went into the kitchen, opened his toolbox, and fixed the cabinet door that had been hanging on a misaligned hinge for 6 months. He did it in 9 minutes. She watched from the doorway, arms folded, and felt suddenly very tired. Lily came out of the hall with a clementine in each hand. She offered one to Emma. Emma took it. For 3 seconds, she almost smiled. Then she caught herself. She went into her room and closed the door and sat on the edge of the bed and held the clementine in her palm and thought very clearly for the first time. There is something wrong about him in a way that means I am wrong about him. The Hartwell Foundation annual gala was held in the ballroom of a hotel that had been old when her grandmother was young. Emma had attended every year since she was 16. She had tried to avoid going this year. She had tried 3 different excuses. Her father had been specific. Her absence after the marriage would be read as weakness. The company could not afford more of that. She had not planned to bring Daniel, he offered. She had looked at the grease-dark crescent under his thumbnail that did not quite wash out and said, without thinking, "You don't have to. I know. Do you want me to come?" She had thought about walking into that room alone, about the questions, the looks. "Yes," she said. She surprised herself. He wore a dark suit. She did not know where it had come from. It was well cut, which surprised her, though she told herself it should not have. He said nothing about her dress, which was floor-length and navy blue, and had taken her 40 minutes to decide on. He looked at her when she came out of the bedroom and said, "Ready?" She was not ready. The lobby was full when they arrived. Emma recognized faces. Board members, family friends, competitors wearing the masks of colleagues. She felt eyes find her, and then, with subtle but unmistakable curiosity, slide sideways to the man beside her. A young security staffer in a rented tuxedo stepped into Daniel's path at the coat check. "Sir, can I see your invitation?" Daniel reached into his jacket pocket. Emma, half a step ahead, turned back. "He's with me," she said. "Of course, Miss Whitfield." The man stepped aside, but not before the assessment had moved across his face. At the cocktail hour, Garrett Weston spotted them from across the room and made his way over with the easy confidence of a man who had never needed to be invited anywhere. He kissed her cheek. His eyes were already on Daniel. "Emma, this is my husband," she said. Something crossed Garrett's face. He recovered quickly. "Of course, I heard." He extended a hand to Daniel. "And what is it you do?" "Mechanical work," Daniel said. "Ah." Garrett's smile did not shift. "Well, good for you." He drifted away. The third moment was the one that changed something. A heavy-set man near the bar, expensive watch, the air of someone whose money was recent enough to still feel like a costume, looked Daniel over once, slowly, the way you look at something you are deciding whether to touch. "You're the mechanic," the man said. "The one she married." He laughed, a sound designed to be heard. It was heard by the small cluster of people standing nearby. "You drove the car here too, or did you just park it?" Emma heard it from 3 feet away. She had spent her whole life learning how to navigate rooms like this. She knew exactly how to smooth it over, how to turn away, how to redirect, how to protect everyone, including the person being insulted, from the indignity of a scene. She stood very still. Then she stepped forward, put her hand through Daniel's arm, and spoke clearly into the small radius of people who had registered the exchange. "Actually, he's my husband. And if you'd like to keep your invitation to next year's event, I'd suggest remembering that." The man blinked. The cluster of nearby guests found other things to look at. Daniel did not react in any visible way, but through the light pressure of her hand on his arm, she felt something shift in him, a long, almost invisible exhalation, like a man who had been holding something for a very long time and had just, slightly, let it go. Later in the car, she drove. The city lights smeared orange across the wet pavement. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I know. I'm sorry I didn't do it sooner." He did not answer. He did not look away from the window either. The attack came on a Wednesday morning. It was surgical, a coordinated campaign by Preston Hale's holding group, which had been circling the Whitfield Group's weakened position for months, triggered the sudden withdrawal of the 3 remaining institutional creditors. By noon, the company's credit facilities had been suspended. By 3 in the afternoon, her father was calling her in a voice she had never heard from him before. Thin, scraped clean of composure. "It's over." She did not tell him not to say that. She was not sure he was wrong. She drove back to the bungalow. Daniel was picking Lily up from swimming. They had been delayed. Emma had the house to herself, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself simply to be frightened. The Whitfield Group had its failures and its cruelties and its architecture of control, but it had also been, in some foundational sense, the structure beneath everything she had ever known. Without it, her father would have nothing. Patricia's world would dissolve. The Foundation's programs, which were, she had to admit, genuinely good regardless of how they were used socially, would end. Hundreds of employees would be displaced. She put her face in her hands. The front door opened. Lily ran past, already narrating a butterfly-kick story to no one in particular. The house filled with the noise of a child existing loudly in a small space, and Emma straightened up and tried badly to compose her face. Daniel came in. He saw her. Bad day. It was not a question. Do you want to talk about it? No. He nodded. He went into the kitchen. She heard him moving around. After a while, he came back with 2 mugs of tea. Not coffee, which she usually preferred. Tea, somehow, was what the moment required. He sat in the armchair across from her and did not say a word. They sat like that for 20 minutes while Lily's voice drifted from the back of the house, explaining something at length to her stuffed animals. Emma did not cry. She came close. She did not. It's going to fall, she said finally. The company, everything my grandfather built. He wrapped both hands around his mug. Is the company what you wanted? He asked. Or is it what you were supposed to want? She did not answer. She was not sure she knew the answer. He did not push. She slept badly. She woke at 4 in the morning to find the house dark and quiet. She went to the kitchen for water and noticed, through the window, that Daniel's truck was gone. She stood at the window for a long time. In the morning, the news came. An anonymous investment fund, operating through a Luxembourg-registered holding entity with no public-facing directors, had moved quietly but decisively into the Whitfield Group's position. It had bought out the withdrawn creditors at a premium, restructured the remaining debt, and extended a full operational bridge to the company. No conditions had been publicly stated. The Whitfield Group had been saved. No one knew who had done it. Emma sat at the kitchen table with her coffee and the news open on her laptop. She looked at the chair across from her, the empty chair where Daniel Hayes ate his breakfast every morning, and felt something cold move through her. On the Friday after the gala, while Daniel was at the garage and Lily was at school, Emma sat down at her desk with her second cup of coffee and her best research instincts and started pulling threads. Daniel Hayes. The name was not entirely absent from the internet. There were just the right number of records, the kind that anchor a person to the world. A business license for the garage, registered 6 years ago. Tax filings. A school enrollment record for Lily. A previous address in a different city. Before that, almost nothing. A gap of nearly 3 years, and before the gap, she almost missed it. The article was buried in an archive behind a paywall, in a financial journal she had to log into with her old London analyst credentials. It was dated 11 years ago. The headline read, Hayes Capital Partners CEO disappears from public life, leaving behind 7-figure mystery. She read it 3 times. Daniel Alexander Hayes, age 29 at the time of the article, founder and CEO of Hayes Capital Partners, a venture and private equity firm that had, in less than 4 years of operation, generated returns that drew comparisons to the early careers of the most celebrated investors of the previous generation. The article estimated that at the time of his disappearance from public life, the entities he controlled directly and through proxies represented somewhere between $3 and $5 billion in capital. He had walked away. No announcement, no press release, no regulatory filing beyond the bare minimum. He had transferred operational control of everything, installed an independent board, established a trust structure of exceptional complexity, and vanished. The article speculated burnout, mental health, a personal crisis. There were hints, carefully worded, of a betrayal someone close to him, in the upper management of his own firm, who had acted against him in some significant way. The details were not public. The legal proceedings, if there had been any, had been settled quietly. Emma sat back in her chair. She thought about the phone call, the cap rate remark, the Luxembourg fund that had materialized overnight to save her family's company. the repaired shoes, the 2 mugs of tea on the night everything was supposed to fall. He had not only walked away from billions of dollars, he had been the man, somewhere off stage, holding her family's company up with his own hands. She picked up her phone and called a former colleague in Boston she had not spoken with in 2 years. She kept the conversation light. She asked at the end, almost as a postscript, whether he had ever crossed paths with one of the old Hayes Capital partners. He had. He paused before he answered her next question. That partner used to do private deals on the side. Discreet intermediary work. The kind of thing you do for people who don't want their names attached. The one client he always took, no matter what. Clifford Whitfield. Emma did not move for a long time after she hung up. Clifford had known. From the beginning, the marriage had not been random. Her uncle had personally placed Daniel Hayes into her life, not because the deal needed a faceless husband, but because he had known exactly whose face it was. He had used Daniel's chosen invisibility as a screen, and he had let Emma walk into it blind. She did not confront Daniel that night. She did not confront her uncle. She sat with herself a long time and remembered everything in order. Daniel asking, in the soft kitchen light, "Is it what you wanted?" Daniel standing very still at the gala bar. Daniel rinsing a glass and explaining swap structures to a wall. On Monday morning, an invitation arrived from one of the Whitfield Group's remaining institutional partners. The Global Capital Forum, a small annual gathering of people who controlled, between them, a significant percentage of the capital that moved the world. The program listed one keynote, founding partner, HCP Holdings. Emma read the line 3 times. She did not tell Daniel she had registered to attend. The forum was held in a glass and steel tower in the financial district. The upper-tier floor was credentialed access only. There was no red carpet and no ostentatious floral arrangement, only clean sightlines and intelligent lighting, and a room full of people who did not need to be impressed. Emma took a glass of water from a passing tray and found her seat near the center of the room. She looked at the empty podium. The lights shifted. The room quieted. The door to the left of the stage opened. Daniel walked in. He wore a suit she had never seen before. Dark charcoal, perfectly constructed, the kind that disappears on a body because it fits too well to announce itself. His hair was the same. His jaw was the same. His hands moved with the same unhurried, settled rhythm. He carried nothing. The room did not rise. No one stood. But something moved through the assembled guests, like a tide shifting direction. Chairs straightened. Heads turned. Conversations ended mid-sentence. Emma's water glass, which she had raised halfway to her lips, stopped there. He reached the podium. His eyes moved across the space with the calm of someone who had stood in rooms like this before and found them unremarkable. Then his eyes found hers. She did not move. Neither did he. A half-second, exactly 1 heartbeat, and then he looked down at the microphone and said, in the same quiet voice he used to tell Lily that yes, probably something lived at the bottom of the ocean. Let's begin. She sat through 40 minutes of the most precise and quietly devastating analysis of global capital flows she had ever heard from a living person. Around her, people who moved markets for a living were writing in their notebooks. Some had their recording devices out, which was against the stated protocol, and no one was being stopped. He spoke about leverage that no one in the room had wanted to name. He spoke about 3 sovereign positions that everyone knew were mispriced, and no one had been willing to say. He spoke about the way liquidity behaves at the seam between 2 regimes, the way water behaves just before it boils. He did not raise his voice. He did not perform. When he finished, there was a beat of silence before the room remembered how to applaud. Afterward, the floor restructured itself into conversation. Emma did not move toward him. She waited. He came to her. Emma. Daniel. They stood about 3 feet apart. The noise of the room moved around them like water around 2 still stones. How long have you known? He asked. A few days. I found the article. He nodded. He looked at the floor briefly, then back at her. I was going to tell you. When? When I was sure it was safe. Safe for who? For Lily, he said. For the life we built. Around them, people were beginning to look. They were calculating. They were reading the body language of the man they had all just watched command a room, and the woman standing close to him. Let's go home, he said. It was the first time Emma realized, as they moved together toward the door, that she had been thinking of the bungalow with the green front door and the driftwood wind chimes as home. They drove back in silence. Lily was at a friend's house, a planned sleepover that now felt to Emma as if it had been arranged by the universe to give them this exact window. Daniel went into the kitchen and filled the kettle. Emma stood for a moment in the living room and looked at Lily's open sketchbook on the coffee table. The drawing on the open page showed 3 figures at the edge of a tide pool, the smallest one in the middle, all of them looking at something in the water. She walked into the yellow kitchen. He leaned against the counter and looked at her steadily, without armor. "I built the firm with 2 people," he said. "My best friend from college and a woman I had been with for 4 years. It was the 3 of us from the beginning. 5 years in, they moved capital out of client accounts into a vehicle they controlled. About 12% of the fund. It was done carefully. It would have been invisible to most auditors. Not to you. Not to me." She did not speak. "My wife had died a year earlier," he said. Lily was 2. He dissolved the partnership. He settled privately. He paid back every investor from his personal holdings. Then I walked away. I didn't want Lily to grow up in a world where every relationship is a position. I had spent 6 months watching 2 people I loved treat trust as a tool. I was done. "And the marriage?" Emma said. "Your Uncle Clifford came to me. He knew who I was. He had done business years ago with one of my old partners. He thought that if he could structure the rescue through a publicly associated nobody, it would be invisible to your family's competitors." I said no twice. "What changed?" "He showed me your file. Not yours, the company's. The employees who would lose their jobs, the foundation's programs. And then he told me what they were going to ask you to do." He paused. I said I would only do it if you agreed freely. "I didn't agree freely, I know. I had no choice. I know that too. That's why I tried to make the house as livable as I could. I knew I couldn't undo the circumstances." She thought about the coffee already made each morning, the eggs, the repaired shoes, the 2 mugs of tea. "You were trying to be decent to me," she said, "because you felt guilty." "Yes, and—" He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was not thinner, just more exposed. "About 2 weeks in, I stopped feeling guilty and started just wanting to. I wanted to make the coffee. I wanted to fix the shoes. I didn't do those things because you'd been wronged. I did them because you ate the eggs. You said yes to Lily about the tide pools. You defended me in that room at the gala when you still thought I was nobody. You didn't have to." Emma set her cup down. "I was wrong about you," she said. "From the beginning. In every way. You were working with what you had. You just had the wrong data." She felt something move in her chest. Not the desperate clutching of someone who needed to be rescued. Something quieter. Something more durable. Preston Hale did not accept defeat gracefully. It took him 3 weeks to identify the HCP holding structure and trace it back to Daniel. When he did, he moved fast. He had someone on the inside of Daniel's old firm, a relic of the original betrayal, still carrying his old resentments. Within 48 hours of being activated, that someone had fed a story to a financial news outlet. Allegations of securities violations in the original fund dissolution. Old accusations that had been privately settled and buried a decade ago, now resurrected and reframed. The story went live at 7 in the morning. Emma read it at the kitchen table while Daniel made Lily's lunch for school. She read it twice. Then she set her phone face down and looked at him. "You know, I know." He sealed Lily's sandwich and put it in her backpack. "It's not true." "No." "Do you have the documentation to prove that?" Everything was preserved. Every communication. Every transaction record. "My lawyers have had it archived since the settlement." She thought fast. "Then the story dies the moment we release it." "But they'll know that. Which means this isn't the real attack. This is the distraction." He looked at her. "What else is Hale moving?" They spent the next 2 hours at the kitchen table, with 2 laptops between them. Lily had been walked over to the neighbor for the carpool. Emma tracked the market movements. Daniel made 3 short calls, low and direct, to people she now understood were not garage industry contacts. By 9:30 she had it. Hale was using the media noise to create a window. While attention was on the security story, his group was moving to acquire a 40% block in one of the Whitfield Group's core operating subsidiaries, a stake held by Theodore Marsh, a 70-year-old minority shareholder being quietly pressured into selling. Once Hale had that block, the Whitfield Group would face a governance deadlock, and Daniel's holding entities, now structurally tied to Whitfield's recovery, would be dragged into the dispute, forced back into the open. "He's not trying to destroy you," Emma said. "He's trying to trap you. Danius, ja was set. And if I don't fight, it costs you the company." Again, she looked at him steadily. "Let me. Emma. Let me handle Marsh. I know him. His daughter was at school with me for a year. He is being pressured because he thinks there's no upside to loyalty. I can give him an upside. You'd be walking into Hale's crossfire. He'll come after you personally. He can try." She held his gaze. "You protected my family's company when I had nothing to offer you, when I was treating you badly. You did it because it was right. Let me do one thing because it's right." He looked at her for a long moment. "Okay." She called Marsh at 10. She was in a car by 11. By 2 in the afternoon, she was sitting across a conference table from a man who had built his stake through 4 decades of patient relationship work and who was deeply, visibly uncomfortable with what was being asked of him. She did not pitch. She did not negotiate. She told him the truth about the pressure campaign, about Hale's intentions, about what would happen to the subsidiary if it was absorbed into Hale's structure. Then she told him what she could offer. Daniel's holding entities would take a protective position around 3 other assets in his portfolio, insulating them from the volatility that was coming. Shelter in exchange for loyalty. Marsh looked at her across the table for a long time. "Your father," he said finally, "never once asked me for anything directly. Always sent someone. I know. You're different. I'm trying to be." He signed the lockup agreement at 3:15. Hale's position was blocked. By the time the financial news outlet received Daniel's legal team's response, 600 pages of meticulously documented evidence, the story was already crumbling. By end of day, the outlet had issued a correction. By morning, 3 competing publications had run the real story. Hale made no public comment. He did not need to. The silence was its own statement. Emma got home at 7:30. The lights in the bungalow were on, warm and yellow. The kitchen smelled like garlic and rosemary. Lily was at the table, doing homework and explaining to a pencil why the giant squid was underrated as a species. Emma stood in the doorway for a moment before anyone noticed her, and she thought, very clearly, this is what a real thing looks like. 3 months later, the bungalow had changed very little. The green front door was the same. The wind chimes still moved their small, specific music in the spring air, and the windows were open now more often than they were closed. Emma had moved her office home. Not the Whitfield Group office she had taken, reluctantly and honestly, a formal role in the company's restructured leadership, but her personal consultancy. The home office had a better window anyway. Daniel had built her a bookshelf along the south wall. He had done it over 2 weekends, measured everything precisely, and said nothing about it being a permanent fixture. She had said nothing either. Some things did not need to be said out loud. The Whitfield Group was stable. Gerald had retired as gracefully as he was capable of, and ceded day-to-day control to Emma and a new board. She had insisted on restructuring the charitable programs first. Her father had objected. She had proceeded anyway. Patricia had sent flowers when Emma's name appeared in a business profile. Emma had sent a polite thank you card. Clifford she had not yet spoken to directly. That was still complicated. It would remain complicated for some time. Emma was learning to be okay with that. Daniel had not returned to public life. He had made one statement through his legal team, confirming his identity and his continued operational role in HCP Holdings. It said nothing about his personal circumstances. It was calibrated precisely to give the minimum information necessary to close the chapter. He still worked at the garage 3 days a week. He had tried to stop and had found that he missed it, the specific satisfaction of something broken becoming functional. A problem that had a real solution. It was a Saturday in late June when Emma told him Lily was at the tide pools with the neighbor's family, her first trip without a parent, which she had lobbied for with the focused determination of someone who had inherited her father's approach to getting what she was after. Daniel had agreed. Emma had made her recite the safety rules twice. They were on the porch. The afternoon had that quality it sometimes had in early summer, when the day could not quite bring itself to end. Emma was reading. Daniel was doing nothing in particular, which was something she had come to recognize as one of his real skills. The ability to be genuinely still without it being emptiness. She set the book down. I've been thinking, okay, about what I want. Not what the company needs, not what my family needs, what I want. He looked at her. I want to stay. Not because of any agreement. Not because of the circumstances. Because I choose to. He was quiet. I know things are still complicated. I know there is no clean way to separate what was forced from what became real. But I think what became real is more real than what was forced. I think that's true for both of us. He looked at her for a long time. It's true for me too. He reached across the small distance between their chairs and took her hand. Not dramatically, not with the weight of a gesture designed to be witnessed. Just a quiet, deliberate thing. His hand, warm and calloused and steady, closing around hers. Okay, he said. Lily came home at 7, sunburned and ecstatic, carrying a jar with a hermit crab in it that she had been explicitly told she was not allowed to take home. She had taken it home anyway, with a detailed explanation involving the crab appearing to be injured and therefore requiring careful observation. Daniel looked at the jar for a moment. We'll talk about the rules. Lily set the jar on the porch table and turned to Emma with the straightforward intensity she sometimes deployed without warning. Are you staying? Emma looked at her. At this small, serious, open-hearted person who had looked at her on her first day in this house and offered to show her her room. Yes, Emma said. I'm staying. Lily considered this. Then she nodded, with the air of someone whose assessment had been confirmed, rather than someone receiving surprising news. Good. The crab's name is Copernicus. Absolutely not, Daniel said. He looks like a Copernicus. Emma laughed. It came out easier than she had expected. Fuller. Less constructed. A real sound in a real place with a yellow wall and a fruit bowl and a jar on the porch containing an illegally adopted hermit crab. Daniel looked at her when she laughed. He did not say anything, but she saw it, the thing behind his eyes. The quiet, enormous thing. She did not look away. Later, after Lily was in bed and Copernicus had been relocated to a larger container with ventilation and fresh water about which Lily had given very specific instructions, Emma stood at the kitchen window and looked at the dark garden. Daniel came to stand beside her. The wind chimes moved their small specific music in the dark. The man who the woman who had learned for the first time to choose, the child who had known, all along, where the good things were. Neither of them had needed to say the word. The green door, the quiet street, the jar on the porch, those had said it first.